Food critic Marcus Bennett, a 42-year-old black culinary reviewer with millions of YouTube followers, spent years traveling America searching for the soul of food. One freezing evening in Savannah, he walked into a cozy southern restaurant hoping to rediscover the taste of his mother's cooking. But while white customers who arrived after him were warmly seated and served, Marcus was ignored and treated like he didn't belong. When he calmly shared the moment on a live stream, the truth spread fast. Yet instead of apologizing, the restaurant owner dragged him into court, accusing him of lies and damage. Their biggest mistake was not knowing who they were trying to silence. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. A cold wind drifted through the historic streets of Savannah, Georgia, brushing past rows of old oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The winter evening was quiet, the sky dim with a pale gray light that lingered just before sunset. Along the cobblestone sidewalks, warm yellow lights began to glow inside restaurants and cafes, inviting people in from the chill. Savannah had always been a city that smelled like stories, fried chicken and buttered biscuits, fresh bread and slow-cooked gravy. For many visitors, those smells meant comfort. For Marcus Bennett, they meant something else entirely. They meant memory. Marcus Bennett was 42 years old, tall, with a broad, steady build that suggested a quiet strength rather than athletic pride. His skin was a deep, warm brown, his face defined by a strong jawline softened by a short, neatly trimmed beard. His hair was cut close, with small streaks of gray beginning to appear at the temples. His eyes were the most noticeable thing about him. Dark brown and observant, the eyes of a man who had spent years studying people as carefully as he studied food. Marcus dressed simply. Tonight he wore worn blue jeans, a thick charcoal wool coat, and a dark scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. To most people passing him on the sidewalk, he looked like an ordinary traveler. But millions of people across the country would have recognized him instantly. Marcus Bennett was the voice behind the popular YouTube channel, Marcus Tastes America. With more than 3 million subscribers, his channel had become one of the most respected platforms for reviewing small restaurants, family kitchens, and traditional American comfort food. Marcus wasn't interested in luxury restaurants or celebrity chefs. He preferred small places, family businesses, restaurants that had been cooking the same recipes for 50 years, places where food carried history, places where food carried heart. His viewers trusted him because Marcus never exaggerated. If a dish was good, he explained why. If something was disappointing, he said it calmly, respectfully. And if a meal carried something deeper, emotion, memory, culture, Marcus had a rare ability to explain that too. But the truth was, the reason Marcus started the channel had very little to do with internet fame. It had everything to do with his mother. Marcus grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, in a modest neighborhood where houses were close together and everyone seemed to know each other. His mother, Angela Bennett, had been a quiet woman with kind eyes and steady hands. She worked long hours as a nurse, but every evening she still found time to cook dinner. Not fancy meals, simple food. Fried chicken, cornbread, collard greens simmered with smoked meat, mac and cheese baked in a deep cast-iron pan. Angela believed food was a way to show love. She used to tell Marcus something he never forgot. People may forget what you say to them, but they never forget how you made them feel at the table. Marcus lost his mother when he was 24. Cancer. It happened quickly. Too quickly. For years after she passed, Marcus found himself chasing something he couldn't quite explain. Every city he visited, every restaurant he reviewed, every plate of food he tasted, he was searching for something. The feeling of sitting in his mother's kitchen again, the warmth of those meals, the taste of home. That search eventually became his YouTube series, Searching for Real Southern Cooking. And that series had brought him here. Savannah. Marcus paused on the sidewalk and looked up at the small wooden sign above the door of a restaurant. Magnolia Table. The sign was simple. White letters painted on dark wood. A soft golden light spilled through the windows and the smell of butter and fried chicken drifted faintly into the street. Marcus smiled slightly. This place had been recommended to him by several viewers. According to online reviews, Magnolia Table was known for classic Southern comfort food. One comment had stood out to Marcus in particular. "Feels like eating at your grandma's house." That line had stayed in his mind for days. Marcus adjusted the small camera clipped to his coat. Tonight he wasn't filming a formal review, just a casual vlog for his channel. Something simple. Honest. Behind him, a black sedan pulled slowly toward the curb. The driver's door opened, and a young man stepped out. This was Kevin Brooks, Marcus's cameraman and longtime assistant. Kevin was 29, tall and lean, with long arms and quick movements that always made him look slightly restless. His skin was medium brown, his hair tightly curled and usually hidden under a dark beanie. His eyes were sharp and curious, always scanning the world the way someone does when they're used to capturing it on camera. Kevin had originally started as a freelance videographer, but after filming several episodes for Marcus, the two developed an easy partnership. Kevin had a quick sense of humor and an energetic personality that balanced Marcus's calmer nature. Where Marcus was thoughtful and quiet, Kevin was fast-talking and expressive, but both men shared one important trait. They loved real stories. Kevin shut the car door and jogged toward Marcus. "You going in already?" he asked, slightly out of breath. Marcus nodded toward the restaurant. "I want to see the place before we start filming." Kevin glanced at the sign. "Magnolia Table, huh? Supposed to be good." Kevin grinned. "Everything's supposed to be good until you taste it." Marcus chuckled. "Fair point." Kevin looked around the narrow street. "I'm going to park around the corner, 2 minutes." Marcus nodded. "Take your time." Kevin raised the car keys. "Don't order without me." "No promises." Kevin laughed and headed back to the car. Marcus turned toward the restaurant again. Through the front window, he could see several tables filled with customers. Families, couples, a few tourists. Warm, yellow lighting reflected off wooden walls and framed black and white photographs of old Savannah. The place looked exactly like the kind of restaurant Marcus loved. Simple, welcoming, comfortable. He pushed open the door. A soft bell chimed overhead. Inside, the air was warm and rich with the smell of butter, garlic, and roasted meat. The restaurant wasn't large, maybe 15 tables, but every corner felt carefully arranged. Wooden chairs, white tablecloths, soft jazz music playing quietly in the background. Marcus took a slow breath. For a moment, it reminded him of something. Not the exact smell of his mother's cooking, but close. Close enough to make him hopeful. Near the center of the dining room sat a young woman with a laptop open beside her plate. This was Lily Carter. Lily was 26 years old, a freelance food blogger who had slowly built a modest following online. She had fair skin sprinkled with light freckles across her cheeks, bright green eyes, and shoulder-length chestnut hair usually tied loosely into a low ponytail. Her build was slender, her posture slightly hunched forward as she typed quickly on her laptop. Lily had the curious personality of someone who loved observing small details. She believed food reviews should capture not only taste, but atmosphere, emotion, the way a restaurant treated its guests. Her blog was still relatively small compared to Marcus's channel, but she was determined to grow it. Tonight, she had come to Magnolia Table after hearing about it from a local friend. As Marcus entered, Lily briefly glanced up. She noticed him the way writers notice everything. His calm posture, the small camera clipped to his coat, the quiet way he studied the room. She didn't recognize him yet, but something about him made her curious. Marcus stepped further inside. A hostess stand sat near the front, though no one was standing there at the moment. He waited politely. Behind the counter, waitstaff moved between tables carrying trays of food. Marcus folded his hands loosely in front of him and looked around the room again. The restaurant still felt warm, comfortable, like a place where good stories could begin. He didn't know yet that tonight would become one of the most important stories of his life. Outside, Kevin was still searching for parking. Inside, Lily returned to typing her notes, and Marcus Bennett stood quietly near the entrance of Magnolia Table. A man who had spent years searching across America for the taste of home, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he had finally found it. Marcus Bennett stood just inside the entrance of Magnolia Table, allowing the warmth of the room to settle around him. Outside, the Savannah evening was still cold and gray, but inside the restaurant the lighting was soft and golden. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the air, mixed with butter, pepper, and slow-cooked gravy. Somewhere near the back of the dining room, a quiet jazz piano played through hidden speakers, the kind of music meant to make people relax and stay a little longer than they planned. Marcus had visited hundreds of restaurants across the country, and he had learned to notice things within seconds. Lighting, noise, the way staff moved through the room. Most importantly, how guests were treated. The room itself was charming. Wooden walls carried framed photographs of Savannah from decades ago. Old riverboats, cobblestone streets, and smiling families standing in front of small diners that no longer existed. Several tables were filled with couples talking quietly over dinner. A family of 4 sat near the window, laughing as a little boy tried to balance a biscuit on his fork. It was exactly the kind of place Marcus loved to feature on his channel. He approached the small hostess stand near the entrance. No one stood behind it. Marcus waited patiently, hands folded loosely in front of him. He wasn't in a hurry. Years of traveling had taught him that good restaurants often moved slowly. A moment later, a waitress passed nearby carrying a tray of drinks. Marcus gave a polite nod. "Good evening," he said calmly. The waitress glanced briefly in his direction. Then she kept walking. Marcus didn't take it personally at first. Restaurants were busy places. Sometimes staff simply missed things. He continued waiting. Across the room, Lily Carter had noticed the exchange. Lily lifted her eyes from her laptop again. Something about the moment felt strange to her. She had already been sitting in Magnolia Table for nearly 20 minutes, quietly observing the atmosphere while typing notes for her blog. From her seat near the center of the room, she had a clear view of the entrance. The man standing near the hostess stand looked patient, too patient. Most people would have already waved someone down. Lily studied him briefly again. He carried himself differently than most travelers, calm, observant, not annoyed, not distracted, just quietly watching. She wondered if he was a writer too. Back near the entrance, another employee finally approached the hostess stand. This was Sarah Whitmore, one of the senior servers at Magnolia Table. Sarah Whitmore was in her early 40s, tall and narrow-shouldered, with straight blonde hair tied tightly into a low ponytail. Her pale face carried a permanent expression of mild impatience, the kind that suggested she had spent years working long shifts in crowded dining rooms. Her blue eyes were sharp, but often distant, rarely lingering on any guest longer than necessary. Sarah had worked in restaurants since she was 18. Years ago, she had moved to Savannah after a difficult divorce and needed steady work to support herself and her teenage son. Over time, she developed a reputation among co-workers as efficient but cold. She believed restaurants ran smoother when emotions stayed out of the job. Kindness, in her opinion, slowed things down. Sarah stepped behind the stand and flipped through a reservation book. Marcus smiled politely. "Good evening. Could I get a table for 1?" Sarah glanced at him. The look lasted less than a second. "Please, wait your turn," she replied flatly. Marcus nodded calmly. "Of course." There was no hostility in his voice, just patience. Sarah looked down at the book again, though Marcus noticed she didn't actually check any reservations. Moments passed. A young couple entered the restaurant behind Marcus. They were white tourists, likely visitors judging by their cameras and bright winter jackets. Sarah immediately looked up. "Welcome in," she said with a warm smile that hadn't been there seconds before. "Just 2 tonight?" "Yes," the woman replied cheerfully. "Right this way." Sarah grabbed 2 menus and guided them past Marcus into the dining room. Marcus watched silently. He didn't say anything. He simply stepped slightly aside to allow them to pass. Another 2 minutes went by, then another group entered. A middle-aged white man wearing a business coat and his wife wrapped in a long red scarf. Sarah looked up again. "Good evening," she greeted warmly. "Table for two." They nodded. "Follow me." Again they walked past Marcus. Marcus remained standing at the hostess stand, still waiting. Across the room, Lily's fingers stopped moving over her keyboard. Her brows slowly drew together. She had been watching the entrance long enough now to notice something uncomfortable. The man who had been waiting earlier was still standing there, and two groups had just been seated before him. Lily leaned slightly to the side in her chair to see more clearly. Something about the situation didn't feel right. Near the kitchen doorway, another pair of eyes had also noticed. This time, it belonged to Daniel Ortiz. Daniel was 23 years old, a junior cook who had only been working at Magnolia Table for about 6 months. He was of Latino heritage with short black hair, warm brown skin, and a slim athletic build that came from years of working long hours in hot kitchens. Daniel had grown up in a small neighborhood in San Antonio, Texas, where his grandmother taught him how to cook traditional dishes. He moved to Savannah hoping to build a career in professional kitchens. Unlike many restaurant workers, Daniel genuinely cared about the way guests experienced a meal. To him, food was about respect. Respect for tradition. Respect for people. Standing partially behind the kitchen door, Daniel watched the entrance area quietly. He had seen the man arrive earlier. He had also seen Sarah seat two other groups ahead of him. Daniel frowned slightly. From where he stood, he couldn't hear the conversation, but the situation looked wrong. Back at the hostess stand, Marcus finally spoke again. His voice remained calm. "Excuse me," he said politely. Sarah turned toward him again, clearly irritated. "Yes? I believe I was here before those guests." Sarah gave a short shrug. "You'll be seated shortly." Her tone suggested the conversation was already over. Marcus studied her face for a moment. Then he nodded again. Understood. But inside, a quiet realization had already begun forming. Marcus had experienced moments like this before during his travels. Not often, but enough times to recognize the pattern. He looked around the room again. Tables were open. 2 near the window. 1 near the back wall. There was no reason he should still be waiting. Except one. Across the room, Lily slowly closed her laptop. Her curiosity had turned into discomfort. She had come to Magnolia Table expecting to review food. Instead, she found herself watching something much more complicated. At that moment, the restaurant door opened again. Cold air swept briefly into the room. Kevin Brooks stepped inside. Kevin rubbed his hands together. "Man, it's freezing out there." He spotted Marcus near the entrance. "Oh, good. You didn't order without me." Marcus gave a small smile. "Still waiting." Kevin glanced around. "For a table?" Marcus nodded. Kevin looked toward the hostess stand. Sarah barely glanced at him. "We're full," she said quickly. Kevin blinked. "But there are open—" "Kitchen's backed up," Sarah interrupted. "You can wait outside." Kevin looked confused. "Outside?" Marcus gently touched Kevin's shoulder. "It's fine," Marcus said quietly. Kevin lowered his voice. "You've been waiting this whole time?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched as another couple entered behind them. Sarah greeted them warmly. "Good evening. Right this way." Kevin slowly turned back toward Marcus. Understanding began forming in his expression. Across the room, Lily Carter watched the entire exchange with growing unease. Near the kitchen door, Daniel Ortiz looked down at the floor, clearly uncomfortable with what he was seeing. And Marcus Bennett stood quietly near the entrance of Magnolia Table. For the first time since walking through the door, he realized the restaurant that felt so warm was never meant to welcome him at all. Marcus Bennett remained standing near the hostess stand for several more seconds after Kevin stepped inside. The warm glow of Magnolia Table still filled the room, but something invisible had changed. The golden lights, the jazz music, the smell of butter and baked bread. none of it felt welcoming anymore. It felt staged, like a warm photograph that hid a colder truth behind the frame. Kevin Brooks leaned closer and whispered, "Marcus, this doesn't feel right." Marcus didn't respond immediately. His expression stayed calm, but his eyes had grown sharper, studying the room in a way that viewers of his channel would recognize. This was the look Marcus had when he realized a story was unfolding. Finally, he turned back toward the hostess stand. "Could I speak with the manager, please?" His voice was steady and polite. Sarah Whitmore, still flipping through the reservation book with exaggerated indifference, sighed, as if the request were a burden. "The manager's busy," she said quickly. "I'll wait," Marcus replied. Sarah's eyes lifted briefly, and there was a flicker of irritation in them. Restaurants ran on routine, and people who challenged that routine were often seen as trouble. She hesitated a moment, then waved toward a passing waitress. "Emily, take care of him." The woman who approached them was Emily Parker, a young server in her early 20s. Emily was short and slender, with pale skin and soft brown hair tied loosely behind her head. Her green eyes had a nervous kindness to them, and her movements were slightly hesitant, the way someone moves when they're still learning the rhythms of a busy restaurant. Emily had only been working at Magnolia Table for 3 months. She had moved to Savannah from a small town in South Carolina, hoping to earn enough money to attend culinary school someday. Unlike Sarah, Emily still believed restaurants should make people feel welcome, but she had also quickly learned that disagreeing with senior staff could cost her shifts. She stopped in front of Marcus and Kevin, holding a small notepad. Her smile was thin and uncertain. "You can, sit over there," she said, pointing to a small 2-person table near the back wall. The table had been empty the entire time Marcus had waited. Marcus nodded. "Thank you." Kevin pulled out the chair and sat down across from him. As they settled at the table, Kevin leaned forward again. "You want me to start filming?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet." Emily handed them menus, her hands moving quickly as if she wanted the interaction to end as soon as possible. "I'll be back to take your order." Then she walked away almost immediately. Kevin opened his menu but wasn't really reading it. "You notice what just happened, right?" he murmured. Marcus gave a small nod. "Yes." "What do you want to do?" Marcus rested his elbows lightly on the table. "First, we eat." Kevin exhaled slowly. Across the dining room, Lily Carter had been watching everything unfold. From her seat, she could now see Marcus and Kevin clearly. Something about the quiet tension between them caught her attention again. Lily was used to observing people for her blog, but tonight, the story developing in front of her wasn't about food anymore. It was about something deeper. She reached slowly into her bag and pulled out her phone, not to record yet, just in case. A few minutes passed. Emily finally returned to their table. Her posture had changed slightly. The nervous kindness in her eyes had been replaced with a forced professionalism that felt distant. "What can I get for you?" she asked. Marcus closed the menu. "I'll try the fried chicken plate," he said calmly, "with collard greens and cornbread," Emily wrote quickly. Kevin ordered the shrimp and grits. Emily nodded once and walked away without another word. Kevin leaned back in his chair. That was friendly. Marcus allowed himself a faint smile. "She's nervous." "You sure that's all it is?" Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he studied the room again. More customers had entered. More tables were being served. But something about the atmosphere now felt different. The warmth Marcus had felt when he first walked in had disappeared. Near the kitchen doorway, Daniel Ortiz was plating several dishes under the bright white lights of the cooking station. The kitchen was loud, metal pans clanging, oil sizzling, cooks shouting short instructions across the room. But Daniel's attention kept drifting toward the dining area. He had noticed the man at the entrance earlier. He had also noticed the tension between Sarah and the new guests. Daniel placed a finished plate on the counter. "Table 4, the head chef called. The head chef was Gregory Harlan, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a thick gray beard and permanently flushed cheeks from years of working beside hot stoves. Gregory had spent most of his career cooking traditional Southern food and had once dreamed of owning his own restaurant. But after several failed business attempts, Magnolia Table had become his last steady job. Gregory wasn't cruel, but he had long ago learned not to question management decisions. Daniel wiped his hands on a towel and glanced toward the dining room again. He could see the man, Marcus, sitting quietly at the table, waiting. Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Other tables received their food. Marcus and Kevin continued waiting. Kevin finally checked his phone. 32 minutes, he muttered. Marcus simply folded his hands together. When the food finally arrived, Emily approached their table with 2 plates balanced carefully in her hands. But the way she placed Marcus's plate on the table felt different. The dish landed with a heavy thud. Not quite slammed, but close enough. The fried chicken sat on a white ceramic plate beside a portion of collard greens and a square piece of cornbread. The chicken looked perfectly cooked. Crispy golden skin, steam rising faintly from beneath the crust. It should have looked comforting. Instead, it felt strangely cold. Emily turned to leave immediately. "Excuse me," Marcus said. She paused. "Yes? Could I have some water?" Emily gave a short nod. "Sure." Her voice held the same distant edge as before. Then she walked away. Marcus looked down at the plate in front of him. Kevin watched him carefully. "You gonna say something?" Kevin asked. Marcus shook his head slowly. "No?" He picked up his phone. Kevin leaned forward. "You starting the vlog?" Marcus nodded. "Yes." Across the room, Lily Carter saw Marcus raise his phone. Her instincts as a writer immediately told her something important was about to happen. She quietly activated the video camera on her own phone and lowered it slightly beside her plate, pretending to check messages while the camera faced Marcus's table. Back in the kitchen, Daniel Ortiz heard a faint voice echo from the dining room. Marcus had started speaking. His voice was calm, measured. Daniel moved closer to the doorway so he could hear better. At the table, Marcus adjusted his phone so the camera faced him. The familiar red "Live" icon appeared on the screen. Thousands of viewers began receiving notifications. Marcus looked into the lens. Then he spoke. "Sometimes the taste of a meal begins long before the first bite." His voice was soft, but every word carried weight. He turned the camera slightly, showing the plate of fried chicken in front of him. "This looks like a beautiful plate of food." He paused. "But food is more than ingredients." Across the restaurant, several customers had started noticing the live stream. Kevin looked down at his phone. Comments were already appearing rapidly. Marcus continued calmly. "Sometimes what matters most is how the meal begins." In the kitchen doorway, Daniel Ortiz felt a deep sense of shame settle in his chest. He knew the food on that plate had been prepared carefully, but suddenly it didn't matter. The damage had already happened. At the table, Marcus looked at the plate again. The fried chicken still looked delicious, golden, crispy, comforting. But Marcus knew something his viewers would soon understand too. The warmth of a meal could disappear long before the food reached the table. Marcus Bennett's live stream did not end dramatically. There were no raised voices, no insults, no accusations shouted across the dining room. Instead, Marcus finished speaking the same way he began, calmly, with quiet control. He ended the broadcast after a few more minutes, thanked his viewers for listening, and gently placed the phone on the table. Around him, Magnolia Table continued operating as if nothing unusual had happened. Plates clinked, forks scraped softly against porcelain. Conversations drifted through the warm air, but beneath that calm surface something invisible had already begun spreading. Across the internet, across Savannah, across thousands of phones. Kevin Brooks stared down at his screen as the comments poured in faster than he could read them. "Marcus, this thing is moving." Marcus folded his napkin neatly beside the untouched fried chicken. "How fast?" Kevin refreshed the screen again. 20,000 viewers in 10 minutes. Marcus gave a small nod, as if the number meant very little. For him, the video had never been about numbers. It was about truth. Across the room, Lily Carter slowly lowered her phone. She had quietly recorded several moments during Marcus's live stream. The way the server placed the plate down roughly, the long wait before service, and the uneasy silence that followed. Lily wasn't the kind of writer who rushed to publish. Her blog had grown slowly because she believed something very simple. Stories deserved patience. Right now, she wasn't sure what the story truly was, but she knew something about Magnolia Table no longer felt right. Near the kitchen doorway, Daniel Ortiz stood frozen for several seconds after hearing Marcus's words echo through the dining room. The young cook wiped his hands on his apron again and again, though they were already clean. The live stream had unsettled him. Daniel had always believed cooking was a way to make people feel welcome. But tonight, watching that plate leave the kitchen and land on Marcus's table with cold indifference had made him feel something close to shame. He turned back toward the cooking station, but his focus was gone. Across town, several miles away from Magnolia Table, a man sat in a dim office reviewing restaurant finances. This was Richard Callahan, the owner of Magnolia Table. Richard Callahan was 58 years old, tall and slightly heavy-set, with thinning gray hair combed neatly back from a high forehead. His face carried deep lines around the mouth and eyes, lines that came not from laughter, but from years of stress and stubborn determination. Richard had built Magnolia Table 15 years earlier. Back then, it had been a struggling neighborhood diner. Through hard work and strict management, he turned it into a well-known local restaurant. But Richard's success had also hardened him. He believed the service industry required discipline, control, and above all, authority. To him, customers were guests only as long as they followed the rules. People who questioned the system were trouble. On his desk sat a half-empty cup of black coffee when his phone buzzed. The message came from one of his floor managers. "You should see this." Attached was a link. Richard clicked it. The video loaded slowly. At first he watched with mild confusion, then irritation. The man on the screen looked calm. Too calm. He was sitting at a table inside Magnolia Table, talking. Richard leaned closer to the screen. Then he heard the words. "Sometimes the taste of a meal begins long before the first bite." Richard's jaw tightened. By the time the clip ended, his coffee had gone cold. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. He watched the video again. Then again, each time his anger grew. To Richard, the video wasn't a calm observation about restaurant culture. It was an attack, an accusation, a public humiliation of the business he had spent 15 years building. He slammed his hand lightly against the desk. Unbelievable. Within minutes, he was dialing the restaurant. Sarah Whitmore answered. "Magnolia Table." "What the hell happened tonight?" Richard demanded. Sarah stiffened slightly. "There was a customer who... I've seen the video." Her silence confirmed everything. Richard's voice hardened. "Did he film inside my restaurant?" "Yes." "And you let him?" Sarah hesitated. He started recording suddenly. Richard stood up from his chair. His anger was no longer just irritation. It had become something sharper. "That man is accusing my staff of discrimination. That's not what he..." Sarah started. "I know exactly what he implied," Richard interrupted. There was a long pause on the line. Finally, Sarah said quietly, "What do you want us to do?" Richard looked at the screen again. The view count was climbing rapidly. Each number felt like a personal insult. "He's damaging my business," Richard said. Then he ended the call. Back at Magnolia Table, the restaurant continued closing for the night. Marcus and Kevin had already left. The fried chicken on Marcus's plate remained untouched when the table was cleared. Across town, the video continued spreading. Local viewers shared it first. Then regional pages. By midnight, it had begun appearing in food discussion forums across the country. Kevin sat in the passenger seat of their car, still scrolling through the comments. "This is getting big," he said quietly. Marcus drove through the quiet Savannah streets. Streetlights reflected across the wet pavement. He didn't look surprised. "People care about fairness," Marcus said simply. Kevin nodded slowly, but a shadow of concern had appeared in his voice. "Yeah, but the restaurant might not see it that way." 3 days later, a letter arrived at Marcus's hotel. The envelope was thick. Official. Marcus opened it slowly at the small desk near the window. Kevin watched from the bed. "What is it?" Marcus read the first page silently. Then he handed the paper across the room. Kevin scanned the text. His eyes widened. "You're kidding!" Marcus leaned back in the chair. Kevin read the words again. The document was a legal complaint filed by Richard Callahan. The accusations were clear. Defamation, financial damage. The lawsuit claimed Marcus's live stream had caused significant harm to Magnolia Table's reputation and business. Kevin looked up. "He's suing you." Marcus remained calm. "Yes." Kevin stood up from the bed. "This is insane." Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Kevin ran a hand through his hair. This could drag on for months. He paused. Maybe years. Marcus said nothing. Kevin continued pacing the small room. "You know what this could do to the channel?" Marcus looked toward the window. Outside, Savannah's quiet streets glowed under soft yellow lights. The city looked peaceful, but he knew the story had only begun. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel Ortiz sat alone in a small apartment kitchen. The television played softly in the background, showing a short segment about the viral restaurant video. Daniel stared at the screen. The reporter repeated Marcus's words from the live stream. Daniel sighed heavily. He thought about the plate he had helped prepare. The food itself had been good, but something else had ruined it long before it reached the table. Daniel rubbed his forehead. For the first time since joining Magnolia Table, he began seriously wondering if he should leave. Across the city, Lily Carter sat at her desk with her laptop open. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. A blog draft was already written, but the publish button remained untouched. She believed stories deserved truth, and right now, the truth was still unfolding. The last thing she wanted was to rush. For now, she would wait, because something told her this story was far from finished. The morning sky over Savannah, Georgia, was pale and cold, the kind of winter light that made the historic courthouse look older than it already was. The Savannah County Courthouse stood tall at the end of a quiet square, its stone columns weathered by decades of rain and heat. A few oak trees nearby swayed slowly in the breeze, their long gray moss moving like soft curtains in the wind. Inside the courthouse, the air was quieter than the streets outside. Footsteps echoed against polished floors. Lawyers in dark suits walked quickly through the hallways carrying folders and briefcases. On the second floor, a courtroom door slowly opened. Marcus Bennett stepped inside. He looked almost the same as he had the night he walked into Magnolia Table, calm, composed, and dressed simply. Today, he wore a dark gray suit and a plain white shirt without a tie. His beard was neatly trimmed, and the calm steadiness in his eyes had not changed. Marcus was not a man who enjoyed confrontation, but he also believed that truth didn't need anger to defend itself. Behind him walked Kevin Brooks, holding a laptop and a small backpack filled with cables and equipment. Kevin looked far more tense than Marcus. His normally energetic expression had been replaced with quiet worry. Kevin had spent most of the previous night researching legal articles and collecting online data. He had downloaded viewer statistics, channel analytics, subscriber records, anything that might prove Marcus was exactly who he said he was. Even so, Kevin still felt uneasy. Courtrooms were not like comment sections. Truth did not always win quickly. Across the room, Richard Callahan was already seated beside his attorney. Richard looked very different from the man who had angrily watched Marcus's live stream days earlier. Today, he wore a tailored navy suit and a perfectly tied red tie, presenting himself as a respectable businessman. But the tension in his face remained. His lawyer sat beside him. This was Thomas Bradley, a sharp-faced man in his late 40s with slick, dark hair combed carefully to one side. Bradley had the appearance of someone who enjoyed courtroom battles. His narrow eyes moved constantly, studying everyone in the room as if evaluating weaknesses. Thomas Bradley had built his legal career defending local businesses from lawsuits and public scandals. To him, this case was simple. A restaurant owner, a viral video, a customer making accusations. Bradley believed the court would side with the business. Marcus and Kevin took their seats at the opposite table. Kevin leaned slightly closer. "You okay?" Marcus nodded. "Yes." Kevin looked toward Richard and Bradley. "They're serious about this." Marcus simply folded his hands on the table. "Then we'll be serious too." Several spectators had gathered quietly in the back of the courtroom. Among them sat Lily Carter. Lily wore a long gray coat over a dark sweater, her laptop resting on her knees as she watched the room carefully. Her bright green eyes moved from Marcus to Richard and then toward the judge's bench. She had decided to attend the trial not as a journalist, but as an observer. Something about the story had stayed with her since that night in Magnolia Table. She wanted to see how it ended. A few rows behind her sat another familiar face. Daniel Ortiz. Daniel looked slightly uncomfortable in the formal setting of the courthouse. He wore a plain black jacket and dark jeans, his posture stiff as he sat quietly with his hands folded. 2 days earlier, Daniel had made a difficult decision. He had resigned from Magnolia Table. The kitchen had once felt like a place of pride to him. Now it only reminded him of the moment he watched a guest treated unfairly. Daniel wasn't sure why he came to the courthouse today, but something told him he needed to be there. At the front of the room, the courtroom door behind the bench opened. Everyone stood. The judge entered. Judge Eleanor Whitaker was a woman in her early 60s with silver-gray hair cut neatly at shoulder length. Her posture was upright and composed, the kind that came from decades of working in the legal system. Her face carried firm but thoughtful features, and behind her glasses were sharp blue eyes that missed very little. Judge Whitaker had served on the Savannah bench for over 20 years. She believed strongly in fairness, but she also believed in evidence. She took her seat and looked across the room. "Please be seated." The courtroom settled into silence. Thomas Bradley stood first. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "my client, Mr. Richard Callahan, is the owner of Magnolia Table, a respected restaurant that has served this community for over a decade." Bradley gestured toward Marcus. "Days ago, the defendant posted a live stream from inside the restaurant accusing the establishment of discriminatory treatment." Marcus remained still. Bradley continued. "The video spread rapidly online and caused severe reputational and financial damage to my client's business." Richard nodded slightly beside him. Bradley raised a folder. "We are seeking compensation for defamation and financial losses resulting from this reckless broadcast." Judge Whitaker turned toward Marcus. "Mr. Bennett, how do you respond?" Marcus stood slowly. His voice was calm. "I shared my experience truthfully." Bradley immediately interjected. "Your Honor, the defendant claims to be a professional food critic with millions of followers." Bradley's tone shifted slightly, but there is no verified evidence confirming that identity. A faint murmur moved through the courtroom. Kevin leaned forward sharply. Marcus remained still. Bradley continued, his voice now carrying faint sarcasm. "It is entirely possible the defendant fabricated this online persona to create influence and damage a local business." He looked directly at Marcus. "In other words, he may be impersonating a public figure." Judge Whitaker's expression grew serious. She leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Bennett," she said carefully, "impersonating a public figure is a serious offense." Kevin's jaw tightened. He quickly opened his laptop. Across the courtroom, Lily Carter frowned slightly as she typed notes. Daniel Ortiz shifted uneasily in his seat. The room had grown tense. Marcus looked toward the judge. His voice remained steady. "I have no reason to impersonate anyone." Bradley spread his hands. Then perhaps you can prove who you claim to be. Kevin began typing rapidly. On his screen, subscriber numbers and channel statistics appeared, but he knew digital evidence sometimes moved slower than courtroom arguments. The silence in the courtroom grew heavier. Marcus stood calmly beside the table. Judge Whitaker watched him carefully. The tension between accusation and truth filled the room like a storm waiting to break. But for now, the courtroom remained suspended in uncertainty. The silence inside the Savannah courtroom stretched longer than anyone expected. Marcus Bennett remained standing beside the defense table, his posture calm, his hands resting loosely at his sides. Across the room, Richard Callahan leaned slightly toward his attorney, whispering something under his breath, while Thomas Bradley adjusted the papers in front of him with controlled impatience. Judge Eleanor Whitaker watched the room carefully. Years of experience had taught her something important about courtrooms. Truth rarely arrived loudly. Most of the time it appeared quietly, hidden in small details. Right now, however, the courtroom was filled with uncertainty. Marcus claimed to be a respected food critic. The opposing attorney claimed he was lying. The burden of proof hung in the air like a weight. Kevin Brooks continued working rapidly on his laptop. His fingers moved across the keyboard with urgent precision, searching through folders, channel records, archived analytics, anything that might show the court the full scale of Marcus's online presence. But internet data sometimes moved slower than courtroom arguments, and time in courtrooms had a strange way of stretching. In the rows behind them, spectators whispered softly among themselves. Then something unexpected happened. A man in the second row suddenly leaned forward. He stared at Marcus for several seconds. Then his eyes widened. The man stood up abruptly. "Wait a minute," he said. The courtroom turned toward him. The man looked to be in his mid-30s, wearing a faded denim jacket and worn boots, the kind of clothing common among working people in Savannah's shipping district. His face carried the sun-darkened skin of someone who spent many hours outdoors. This was Caleb Turner. Caleb worked as a dock supervisor at the Savannah River Port. He wasn't involved in media or law, but he spent many evenings watching YouTube videos while resting after long shifts, and one of his favorite channels was Marcus Tastes America. Caleb raised his phone. "That's him," he said, pointing toward Marcus. Thomas Bradley frowned. "Sir, please remain seated." But Caleb shook his head. "No, I'm serious. That's Marcus Bennett." He quickly unlocked his phone and opened YouTube. The screen lit up brightly in his hands. Within seconds, he found the channel he was searching for. "Look," Caleb said, stepping forward slightly. He turned the screen toward the courtroom. On the display appeared the familiar channel page, Marcus Tastes America, 3.2 million subscribers. Marcus's face appeared clearly on the channel banner, the same face now standing in the courtroom. A ripple moved through the spectators. Kevin stopped typing. A small smile appeared on his face for the first time that morning. Judge Whitaker leaned slightly forward. "Mr. Turner, is it?" she asked calmly. "Yes, Your Honor." "You are familiar with the defendant's work?" Caleb nodded quickly. "I've watched his videos for years. My wife loves them too." He gestured toward the phone. "That's definitely him." Thomas Bradley stood abruptly. "Your Honor, a random viewer's opinion is not legal evidence." But Kevin had already turned his laptop toward the judge. "Actually, Your Honor, I have something more formal." Kevin connected his laptop to the courtroom display monitor. The large screen behind the judge flickered to life. Within seconds, the YouTube Analytics dashboard appeared. A subscriber count, video archives, millions of views, years of recorded content. Every detail clearly connected to Marcus Bennett. Kevin spoke carefully. "This is the official creator dashboard for Marcus Tastes America. It's verified by YouTube and linked to the defendant's identification." The numbers spoke for themselves. Thomas Bradley's confidence began to fade slightly, but the surprises were not finished yet. From the spectator benches, Lily Carter slowly stood up. She closed her laptop and stepped forward carefully. "Your Honor," she said respectfully, "may I present something as well?" Judge Whittaker studied her briefly. "And you are?" "Lily Carter. I'm a food blogger based in Savannah." Judge Whittaker nodded. "What do you have to present?" Lily held up her phone. "I was inside Magnolia Table the night this happened." The courtroom grew quiet again. "I recorded part of the interaction." Thomas Bradley immediately objected. "Your Honor." Judge Whittaker raised a hand. "Let's see the footage." Kevin stepped aside as Lily connected her phone to the monitor. The screen flickered again. Then the video began playing. The footage showed the restaurant interior. Marcus standing near the entrance. Sarah Whitmore ignoring him. White customers arriving later and being seated first. The sound of dishes clinking filled the courtroom as the video continued. Then came the moment when Emily Parker placed the plate of food roughly on Marcus's table. The silence inside the courtroom deepened. Even Richard Callahan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. When the video ended, no one spoke for several seconds. Judge Whittaker turned slowly toward Richard. "Mr. Callahan," she said quietly, "would you like to explain what we just saw?" Richard's face had turned pale. His attorney opened his mouth, then closed it again. But before Richard could answer, another voice spoke from the spectator section. Daniel Ortiz stood up. He looked nervous, but determined. Daniel stepped forward slowly. "My name is Daniel Ortiz," he said. "I worked in the Magnolia Table kitchen until 2 days ago." Judge Whittaker studied him. "And what would you like to say?" Daniel hesitated for a moment. Then he spoke. "That wasn't the first time something like that happened." A murmur moved through the courtroom. Daniel continued. "Some customers were treated differently depending on who they were." His voice grew steadier as he continued. "I didn't say anything before because I was new. I didn't want to lose my job." He glanced briefly toward Marcus. But watching that happen, it didn't feel right. Judge Whittaker leaned back in her chair. The pieces of the story had finally come together. Evidence, witnesses, video, truth. She looked once more at Richard Callahan. Then she spoke. "This court does not punish honesty." The words echoed softly through the room. Judge Whittaker lifted her gavel. "The claim of defamation and financial damage is dismissed." The gavel struck once against the wooden desk. A quiet wave of relief moved through the room. Kevin exhaled deeply. Marcus remained calm, but a faint expression of gratitude appeared in his eyes. In the back row, Lily Carter opened her laptop again. This time, she began typing. Her story was finally ready to be told. The winter weeks that followed the Savannah courthouse trial were colder than usual. Not because of the weather, but because the story that began inside Magnolia Table had quietly spread across the city. Savannah was not a large city when it came to local reputation. Restaurant culture in particular moved through word of mouth faster than any advertisement. People talked in barbershops, in grocery stores, on morning walks near the riverfront, and they talked about Magnolia Table. At first, the restaurant tried to continue as if nothing had happened. The familiar wooden sign still hung above the door. The warm lights still glowed in the windows each evening. The smell of fried chicken and cornbread still drifted out onto the sidewalk. But something had changed. People noticed. Customers who once waited 30 minutes for a table now walked past without stopping. Online reviews began appearing from people who had never visited before but had watched the courtroom footage or Lily Carter's article. Even regular guests felt uneasy. A restaurant that once felt warm now carried a quiet tension. Inside Magnolia Table, Sarah Whitmore still worked the evening shift. She moved through the dining room the same way she always had. Efficient, quick, professional. But the room around her was quieter than before. Sarah's tall frame moved between tables that were now half empty. Her blonde ponytail swung slightly as she carried trays from the kitchen to the few remaining guests. She had never been the kind of person who spent time thinking about public opinion, but business numbers were harder to ignore. One evening, she approached the kitchen door and looked inside. Gregory Harlan, the head chef, stood over the stove stirring a large pot of gravy. His thick gray beard was slightly messier than usual, and his broad shoulders looked heavier under the white chef coat. "Another slow night?" Sarah said flatly. Gregory sighed. "We had 6 tables all evening." Sarah didn't respond. She simply turned and walked back into the dining room. 2 weeks later, Magnolia Table closed its doors. There was no dramatic announcement, no final celebration, just a small, printed sign taped to the front door. Closed until further notice. Within days, the windows went dark. The once warm lights never turned on again. Across town, Marcus Bennett sat inside his modest hotel room editing a new video. The soft glow of his laptop illuminated the desk as he reviewed the footage carefully. Kevin Brooks sat on the nearby couch, scrolling through comments on his tablet. "You know," Kevin said after a moment, "a lot of people expected you to celebrate that restaurant closing." Marcus continued adjusting the video timeline. "I didn't want that." Kevin raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" Marcus nodded slowly. The goal was never to destroy someone's business. Kevin leaned back. "Internet didn't see it that way." Marcus paused the video and looked out the window at the quiet Savannah street below. Restaurants were places where people came together, families, friends, strangers sharing the same room. When that idea disappeared, the food itself lost meaning. Marcus pressed play again on the video timeline. On the screen appeared a simple title: "Food should bring people together." In the video, Marcus sat at a wooden table with warm light falling gently across the scene. He spoke calmly to the camera. "Sometimes the problem isn't the recipe." He paused. "It's the heart behind it." Kevin watched the clip play through. "That one's going to spread too," he said quietly. Meanwhile, another story had begun quietly growing in Savannah. A few blocks away from the riverfront, a small corner building reopened under a new sign: Ortiz Kitchen. The restaurant was modest. Only 8 tables filled the room, and the walls were painted a soft, warm yellow instead of Magnolia Table's darker wood. A chalkboard menu hung above the counter listing simple Southern dishes: fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, shrimp, and grits. Behind the counter stood Daniel Ortiz. Daniel looked slightly older than when he left Magnolia Table only weeks earlier, but the nervous tension he once carried had been replaced with something steadier: confidence. His short, black hair was tied back under a cook's cap, and his brown eyes carried the focused warmth of someone who truly cared about every plate leaving the kitchen. The idea for the restaurant had come suddenly. After the courthouse trial, Daniel realized something simple: if food truly meant respect, then the restaurant itself had to reflect that. One evening, a customer asked him why he opened the place. Daniel simply smiled. "Everyone deserves a seat at the table." Across Savannah, Lily Carter sat inside a small coffee shop, finishing the final edits on an article. Her laptop screen displayed the headline, "More Than Food: What One Dinner Revealed About Kindness and Hospitality." Lily had written many restaurant reviews before, but this article felt different. It wasn't about flavors or menus, it was about culture, about the invisible ways people were treated in everyday places. When the article was published online, it spread quickly. Readers shared it not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. The story reached thousands of readers across the country. Many of them left comments about something simple: respect. Weeks later, Marcus Bennett returned to Savannah one final time before continuing his travels. The city had grown warmer as spring slowly replaced winter. Oak trees now carried fresh green leaves, and sunlight reflected brightly off the Savannah River. Marcus walked slowly down a quiet street lined with small local restaurants. Kevin followed behind him with the camera bag slung over one shoulder. "You sure this is the place?" Kevin asked. Marcus nodded toward a small restaurant ahead. It wasn't large, just a narrow building with white painted walls and a simple wooden sign above the door. The name read, "Miss Eleanor's Kitchen." Kevin squinted. "Never heard of it." Marcus smiled slightly. That's usually a good sign. Inside the restaurant, only a few tables were occupied. At the counter stood an elderly woman placing fresh pieces of fried chicken onto a serving tray. This was Eleanor Hayes. Miss Eleanor was 78 years old, short and slightly round with soft silver hair curled neatly around her ears. Her warm brown skin carried gentle wrinkles that spoke of decades spent cooking for family and neighbors. Her eyes were kind and steady, the kind of eyes that made strangers feel comfortable immediately. Miss Eleanor had run the small kitchen for nearly 30 years. Most of her customers were locals who came not only for the food, but for the warmth she carried into the room. Marcus approached the counter. "Good afternoon." Miss Eleanor looked up and smiled. "Afternoon, sweetheart. You hungry?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She handed him a plate. Fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread. The smell alone made Marcus pause. He sat at a small table near the window. Kevin quietly set the camera on the table, but didn't start filming yet. Marcus picked up a piece of chicken and took a bite. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Kevin watched carefully. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, the crisp skin, the warm seasoning, the tenderness of the meat. Something familiar returned. Something he had been searching for across hundreds of restaurants. Marcus slowly smiled. For the first time in many years, he looked up at Kevin. "Yeah," Marcus said softly. He glanced down at the plate again. "This tastes like home." Stories like Marcus Bennett's remind us that the way we treat people often matters more than anything we serve on a plate. A restaurant can have the perfect recipe, the freshest ingredients, and the most beautiful dining room. But if respect is missing, something essential is lost before the meal even begins. In our everyday lives, the same truth quietly applies. The way we greet a stranger, the patience we show to someone different from us, and the kindness we offer when no one is watching can shape another person's entire day. Marcus did not fight with anger. He simply told the truth with calm dignity. That is a powerful lesson for all of us. Sometimes the strongest response to unfairness is not shouting louder, but standing firmly with honesty. And sometimes the smallest act of respect can change the entire atmosphere of a place. This story also reminds us that prejudice often hides in ordinary moments. Not always in dramatic actions, but in small choices. Who we welcome, who we ignore, who we decide deserves a seat at the table. Changing the world does not always require grand speeches. Sometimes it begins with something simple, a smile, a fair chance, a decision to treat every person with the same dignity we hope to receive ourselves. Daniel chose to build a restaurant where everyone is welcome. Lily chose to tell the story with honesty and patience. And Marcus chose to answer bitterness with calm truth. Each of them reminds us that change often begins with one person deciding to do the right thing even when it is uncomfortable. So today, wherever you are watching from, take a moment to think about the people you meet every day. The cashier at the store, the coworker you barely speak to, the stranger who sits quietly beside you on a bus or in a cafe. A small act of kindness might mean more to them than you realize. Respect costs nothing, but it can change someone's entire story. If this story touched you in any way, share it with someone who might need this reminder today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what lesson stayed with you the most. Your words may inspire someone else who reads them. And if you believe that kindness still matters in this world, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that bring people together rather than divide them. May God bless everyone watching today. May He fill your homes with peace, your tables with warmth, and your hearts with compassion for others. If you believe that every person deserves dignity and a place at the table, write Amen in the comments.